Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is March 11th, 2026. In what ways are Trump's tariffs violating Supreme Court rulings? How many Catholic leaders got shuffled after sexually abusing children in Rhode Island? What new food recalls are there for you and your pets this week? Who got fired and hired in the Department of Homeland Security? Who does Trump think anointed him to fight Iran? How are the Kurds getting their chains yanked around this time in West Asia? What's going on behind the scenes of the 55-year-long war on drugs? How are trans rights being stripped in Kansas? What Trump sycophant finally acquired Warner Brothers Discovery media conglomerate? Can you trust Proton Mail to keep your information private? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps and links in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
New York leads more than 20 states suing Trump over new across-the-board tariffs. March 5, 2026, via The Independent. New York Attorney General Letitia James and more than 20 other states are suing President Donald Trump to block newly imposed global tariffs after the Supreme Court struck down his sweeping tariff agenda last month. Trump unlawfully imposed tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, according to the Supreme Court. After that decision, the president swiftly raised worldwide tariffs to 15% effective immediately, citing Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. A coalition of Democratic states argue in the new suit that the president's use of that law is similarly illegal. Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act gives the president the power to impose temporary tariffs of up to 15% for a maximum of 150 days to address serious balance of payment deficits or to prevent the significant depreciation of the dollar abroad. James and the coalition of Democratic states say that the president is misusing the statute to bring tariffs. They argue it was created to address specific currency crises that would arise before the end of the gold standard fixed-rate currency exchange system in 1976. Section 122 does not grant the president authority to impose tariffs based on a trade deficit, the lawsuit says. Trump is the first president ever to invoke Section 122. The suit was filed in the U.S. International Court of Trade in Manhattan. James, who led a massive fraud investigation into Trump's real estate empire, has joined more than 36 lawsuits against the Trump administration since the president returned to the White House. In turn, Trump has repeatedly pushed for criminal investigations into the state attorney general, none of which have landed. Speaking from the White House briefing room after the Supreme Court's 6-3 decision, Trump raged against what he called a deeply disappointing ruling, and said he was absolutely ashamed of 2 conservative justices he appointed who sided with the court's majority. They're against anything that makes America strong, healthy, and great again. They're also frankly a disgrace to our nation, those justices, Trump said. They're very unpatriotic and disloyal to our Constitution. That night, he said he was imposing a 10% tariff on all trading partners. Less than 24 hours later, he bumped that rate up to 15%, based on a thorough, detailed, and complete review of the ridiculous, poorly written, and extraordinarily anti-American decision, he wrote on Truth Social. The tariffs, a key tool in the president's economic agenda, sparked global chaos and several lawsuits from small businesses. Trump, using tariffs as leverage to extract deals with other countries, repeatedly walked back his levies and markets gradually rebounded. Hundreds of business owners across the country who were forced to absorb the cost of Trump's tariffs and then pass costs to consumers through higher prices have filed complaints seeking reimbursements. Approximately 1,000 complaints have been filed with the Court of International Trade in the aftermath of the Supreme Court's ruling. All in all, my first takeaway from this is how much of a big baby Donald Trump is. Him complaining and throwing fits and temper tantrums about the Supreme Court justices don't trust him, they don't believe in him, they're unpatriotic, anti-constitutional, blah, 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 because they told him no, is just kind of really boils down the entirety of his administration and, honestly, the conservatives of the moment into the most condensed condensed gloop that you can take a look at. The conservatives of today in the United States are, and when I say, I'm specifically saying conservatives instead of, say, far right or alt right, because I'm talking about what I'd be generous to say, the more general Republican milieu instead of, the groypers or whatever. It's just driven by this entitlement and this diehard belief that they are and must be right 100% of the time, and anyone who tries to tell them any different is not presenting new information, but is instead just hates America, is unpatriotic, hates Donald Trump, wants to see him fail, blah, 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 blah. Everything you've probably already heard before. Just a sheer commitment to the Trump agenda in a way that is almost religious in a sense, very monarchical and in quite another sense, where they just want to believe that Donald Trump is right all the time. And it's the same kind of thing you see from people during football season, who the ref makes a call, oh, that was a bad call, we're being cheated, the NFL is rigged, etc., etc., etc. Not that I haven't said that, but it's the same kind of complaint. Something doesn't go their way, and it's because they're being cheated and robbed and scammed, not because things just don't work that way. And the tariffs just straight up don't work the way that Donald Trump wants them to, but him and his contemporaries and his sycophants are just not going to acknowledge that. They're a stupid economic policy. I have no idea where he got it from, and it's just not been working. It's not been helping anything. All of the money that they've been cutting and saving from Doge is basically just not there. The money that they've been making on the tariffs is not really going to help anything. We all know that the money was going to be spent on, was it the soybean farmers? Because China wasn't buying their soybean crop because of the trade war. And so these guys are all going to be destitute in a moment. And so that's what the tariffs are going for. And so or we could just straight up not bail out the soybean farmers and not have the tariffs, and there'd be little difference. So when the Supreme Court rules, hey guys, you can't actually do these stupid tariffs because you don't have the authority to do that, rather than trying to come up with a new idea, it's, oh, well, you're telling me no, that's bad, so I'm going to do the maximum tariffs that I can do under this new law. And that's why we're back in this situation. And slapping all these tariffs on trade with every single country that we trade with is so futile and infantile. There's no reason to be, going after all this trade. It's based on imaginary trade deficits that don't actually exist, at least not in the way that Donald Trump and the Republican Party thinks that they do. And so it's all just smoke and mirrors to one part, and sheer ignorant stupidity on another, and it's embarrassing. The United States has and is doing a lot worse than having stupid economic policy, so it's not the most embarrassing thing about living in the United States, but it certainly is embarrassing to see neighbors cheering for higher prices on everything. So that way, the government can get more in taxes, so to speak. And, we're going to strengthen American goods. But we're really not, of course, because we're never going back to industrialism, not under the capitalist regime, not when we're going to have to actually pay workers for their labor in this country. Not that we were doing a good job of it in the first place, but doing a better job than our capitalists do in regard to foreign workers in overseas places with less protections, or just a weaker currency, so that less money can be taken out of the profits, give them equal quality of life at our most generous, of course. And so those jobs aren't coming back. They're not going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. It's not doing anything except for enriching a small handful of people and screwing everybody else over. And for as much as the right likes to talk about, small businesses, and the Republicans and the Democrats both on the right love to talk about small businesses because they don't really understand economics or labor value or anything like that. So they think, mom and pop shops must be better than big box stores because ties to the community or something, and not, these places are all running off unpaid labor that's family, or just straight up gouging other people, and with the excuse of, we're too small to be able to afford to pay you very well. Not that, Walmart is better than your small local grocery store or whatever, but, these guys, the petite bourgeoisie, the little capitalists in your neighborhood, aren't exactly better than the big capitalists on Wall Street and Washington. So, these guys are getting screwed too, though, and I care a little bit more because they are literally my neighbors, and I know that's probably contradictory in its own way. Whatever, the internal contradictions will be addressed eventually. So, the tariffs are just screwing over these guys, and then we're paying more, but we're not getting paid more, so it's all just, the fleecing of the American people. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. AG details scope of Catholic Church child sexual abuse and cover-ups in Rhode Island over decades. March 4th, 2026, via Rhode Island Current. For more than 7 decades, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Providence concealed the sexual abuse of hundreds of children by over 6 dozen clergy members, according to a long-awaited report released Wednesday by Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Noem. A total of 72 deacons and priests faced credible accusations of abuse dating as far back as 1950, the 282-page report states. Only 14 of the men listed are still alive. Systemic sexual abuse by New England Catholic clergy was exposed over 2 decades ago. The AG's report, which took nearly 7 years to complete, pieces together as complete a picture of what happened in Rhode Island, home to the largest per capita Catholic population in the nation. State police and the AG's office found at least 315 victims of abuse, most of which occurred during the 1970s and the 1960s. The most recent known incident of misconduct cited was in 2011, when the principal of St. Joseph's School in West Warwick alleged a deacon who taught in the school had pulled down the pants of several 6th grade boys. Most accused priests avoided disciplinary action or criminal charges because the diocese would often transfer them to new parishes without warning those congregations, a practice the report called priest shuffling. Noem said 31 Rhode Island priests were transferred at least 5 times during their careers, promoting a culture of secrecy. Only 20, or about 26% of the clergy identified in the report, ever faced criminal charges. Just 14 were convicted. Diocese officials mostly cooperated, providing investigators access to more than 250,000 files, including treatment records of the accused priests and civil settlements from clergy sexual abuse cases and victims' records. But there are limits to the church's partnership. Noem said that there was evidence that the diocese had a practice of destroying confidential files when the priests died, according to state investigators. Diocese officials also repeatedly refused requests for interviews with church personnel who were responsible for overseeing the investigations and responses to child sexual abuse by clergy, according to the report. The review found that historically the diocese did not report any complaints of sexual abuse of children to law enforcement. Even in the 1990s, when reporting began to improve, the diocese still withheld complaints about priests who were still living. But the diocese was quick to defend itself with an accompanying statement published online, framing the state's report as a needless revisit of historical cases that masks decades of institutional reform and a zero-tolerance policy established in 2002. Noem used the report's release to renew his perennial call for the state to allow a grand jury, with court oversight, to issue a report with findings and recommendations, even when it decides no one should be charged with a crime. Noem has requested this legislation for the past 6 years. He also wants the General Assembly to extend the statute of limitations in cases of sexual assault involving the Catholic Church and other institutions. It's a policy the diocese has opposed. Other states have tried this approach and has led dozens of other dioceses to bankruptcy, the church statement said. It is new news to nobody. See, guys, this is why I'm Protestant. No, I'm kidding. The Protestant church is not any better than this. They're just significantly more localized. So what you end up with is, rather than being able to shuffle religious child abusers around, you just develop little cults that will stand and protect them. So, great job, Prots. You're killing it out there. Quite literally, as we'll be seeing shortly. But, no, the systems of abuse within the church is, in some ways, I think, tied directly to the religion. The Christian faith does have, I'm not going to say this is all unique to it, but does have the strict kind of top-down authority measures to it, in which the authority can't be questioned. And so when the authority abuses their authority, it's humiliating onto the people involved, and it can help breed distrust. So instead they cover it up and shuffle it around. And all of that is to, keep people locked in to the church rather than questioning it and breaking away from it. So, not unique to Catholicism, not unique to Christian religion either. But in the United States, again, we have such a heavily religious public in ways that a lot of other places don't, that they can get away with this pretty easily, and often do. The other thing is that the Catholic Church, as opposed to other Protestant churches, have this huge infrastructure behind it, a lot of wealth, a lot of power, and a lot of very well-developed organizing that can then extract abusive deacons and priests and such from churches and move them somewhere else. Why they're not just getting rid of them is a question that I think everybody wants answered. And I don't really have a solution for that, except for the fact that because these people are religious, there is a modicum of belief in forgiveness and whatever. And we all know that, of course, the general Christian is not going to forgive you for doing something at all that goes against the American empire, because of how thoroughly Christian nationalism has corrupted this country, or maybe that this country has corrupted Christianity, depending on your point of view. But the belief that the people in the so-called ruling class, in the clergy class, deserve forgiveness. We have to forgive them. We have to give them the opportunity to do better, which of course we never extend to drug abusers or divorcees or people who've had abortions, or LGBTQ people, etc. Not that those are all on the same level, of course, but if you are strictly against abortion, how many people do you know get basically kicked out of their churches and families? But as soon as you abuse a child, say, oh well, we gotta protect you because you're of the stand-in for the ruling class here in Christian America. But really, it's just appalling. And the fact that so many Americans are still bought into the Christian faith hook, line, and sinker like this without question is, embarrassing. But it also just goes to show the potential for, and maybe even likelihood of, abuse from systems of power that are used to oppress rather than uplift the people. Of course, we see the excellent corollary to this with the capitalist system, with the Epstein Island scandal. And of course, none of those guys are getting in trouble either. Sure, the public is mad, but what's being done? Literally nothing. So, their victims are getting thrown out into the wild. And so, the same thing is happening in the church here, where the victims get screwed over and by the powers that be that want to protect their friends, their class equals, if you will, and dispose of the evidence and the victims, so that way the power entity in this case, the church, protects itself and keeps itself afloat and doesn't have to really get introspective as to why this keeps happening, how this keeps happening. We've got, 77 some odd church leaders across, 20, 30 years, all within one diocese and in one area, in the smallest state in the United States. So it's, one definitely has to question a lot about the Catholic Church as an institution when it allows and propagates this. And then when it pulls out statements like, oh, well, investigating is, you're just digging up the sins of the past. You're just digging up the sins of the past, as if those sins of the past don't actually still hurt people who are still alive today. And all of these priests and deacons, most of them anyway, totally got away with it. 14 of them are still alive, and only 20 have ever been prosecuted. The rest just got off. Although maybe for that reason is why people still believe in the church, because that they want to believe and live their lives convinced that they're going to get theirs when the time comes. When these priests, these child abusers die, God's going to handle the justice for them since they can't find it on earth. I don't know. It's compelling, and I get it. But the systems of power and hierarchy that are used to, manipulate and control the public, when these systems of power, these systems of hierarchy, are there to control rather than uplift, or to oppress rather than uplift the public, is where we start to really see all of this corruption and pain and torture happening. When we have systems that are designed to benefit the public, systems that have the public in mind rather than their own goals in mind, those systems are going to be incredibly motivated to purge this corruption, this violence out of these systems in order to protect and uplift the people rather than rule and govern them. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization, and that means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Here's a list of food recalls. All links for more information are in the video description. Recall on a chicken fried rice product, February 19, 2026, via the USDA. The NRTE chicken fried rice items were produced between September 8th of 25 and November 17th of 25. The following products are subject to recall. 1.53 kilogram cardboard packages containing 6 bags of frozen Ajinomoto yakitori chicken with Japanese-style fried rice, with best before or milieu avant dates of September 9th through November 12th of 26. 20-ounce plastic bag packages containing frozen Trader Joe's chicken fried rice with stir-fried rice, vegetables, seasoned dark chicken meat, and eggs, with best by dates of 9/8 through 11/17. Products subject to recall bear establishment number P18356 of the USDA mark of inspection. Trader Joe's item was shipped to Trader Joe's retail locations nationwide. The Ajinomoto item was shipped only to Canada. Product list in the expanded recall was updated to reflect that products with the listed lot numbers, regardless of best by date, are subject to the recall. Recall on Great Value Cottage cheese, February 26, 2026, via the FDA. Saputo Cheese USA Incorporated, SUSA or Saputo, is voluntarily recalling select cottage cheese products produced by SUSA due to the possibility of liquid dairy ingredients used in the items not being fully pasteurized according to state regulatory standards. Consuming products that are not fully pasteurized can pose a significant health risk, especially to the young and elderly or immunocompromised individuals. The issue was discovered during pasteurizer troubleshooting exercises conducted by SUSA in conjunction with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. The impacted pasteurizer was returned to normal function and is verified and sealed by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. No other products in the facility were affected. The affected products were sold under the Great Value label and were distributed to Walmart stores and distribution centers in Alaska, Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, California, Colorado, Georgia, Iowa, Idaho, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, Montana, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon, Texas, Tennessee, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming between February 17th and February 20th, 2026. Recall on chicken chips for dogs, February 24th, 2026, via the FDA. Elite Treats LLC of Boca Raton, Florida, is recalling a single lot of Elite Treats chicken chips for dogs, 6-ounce bags, because it may be contaminated with salmonella. The product is packaged in a 6-ounce black and gold bag marked on the back side with lot number 24045 and an expiration date of 4/27. Salmonella can cause illness in pets eating the products. People can become exposed to this pathogen through multiple routes, such as handling the contaminated products, contact with pets who have eaten the recalled product, and or contact with surfaces that have touched contaminated food, such as bowls, utensils, or countertops. Risk of human illness from salmonella-contaminated pet food increases if people do not thoroughly wash their hands after handling the food, or having contact with their pet, or by not thoroughly cleaning contaminated surfaces. This is why we need government regulation. Or maybe more accurately, this is why we need high-quality government regulation that's interested in protecting the people rather than the corporations. The fact that you could get, a cheese product that hasn't been pasteurized simply by mistake is remarkable, honestly, in this day and age. And which on top of that, just the fact that there's a whole craze about raw, unpasteurized milk is absurd to me. And the funniest part is, of course, these people are like, oh, you won't get sick if you boil it first. Yeah, that's what pasteurizing is. I have no idea where these people get these woo-woo ideas about what is and isn't healthy. And, oh, we have to get all natural products. Oh, we have to get raw products. We have to get, raw milk, raw, honey. I think raw honey is safe to eat. I don't know. Look that up. All of this other stuff. And I know it comes from a distrust of the government. The government's telling us we have to do this thing. It's because it's bad. But it also comes from an idea of, we have to get closer to nature. We have to get closer to nature. We've lost our way as people. We have to get closer to nature. Totally ignoring the fact that tons of natural things are just bad for you. Like arsenic, which is in apple seeds. Or no, cyanide, I think, is in apple seeds. Arsenic is also natural. Like or poisonous mushrooms. Go pluck mushrooms and eat them, and maybe you'll die a terrible, agonizing death of poison. Like, what? That's supposed to be good for you? Raw pork. Yeah, go chow down on raw pork, raw meats. But milk, yeah, sure, we'll eat that raw. And again, it comes down to distrust of the government. So if the government's telling us to do something, means it's suspicious. Oh, I don't think the government has my best interests in mind. But then, of course, these guys always go and they vote for Trump and other radical Republican crazies because, the government's bad when it tells you to sit next to a black person on the bus. But when it says to also, and when it says to cook your milk, but when it says, we have to put on tariffs and we have to kill all the Arabs, then suddenly the government's good. I digress. But what we need is government regulation. We need the government to actually make sure that the food we're consuming is safe. And the reason for this is, of course, that the capitalists have no interest in making sure that the food we consume is edible, let alone safe, healthy, good for you, free of disease or foreign objects. They'd be happy to put sawdust in your bread and sand in your salt if it keeps them richer, right? A whole scoop of sand off the beach is a lot cheaper than boiling the seawater to get the same amount of salt. So they're always going to cut it down. They're always going to pollute it. They're always going to cut corners in the process, just like we're seeing here with the pasteurization not working in the machine and them not checking until the FDA comes and investigates. So, not the FDA, the Department of Agriculture comes to investigate. Just as an example, I don't know why the cottage cheese one stands out to me the most, just because these pasteurization machines have been so standardized for so long, and pasteurization has been standard since Louis Pasteur, developed boiling things, I guess. And also because the whole raw milk thing is, and we have the posters, "Make milk great again," or whatever it is, as if people haven't been, fight the war against whole milk, or whatever the Department of Health has been going on about in regards to milk, as if whole milk has ever not been on the shelf, except maybe 5 minutes before a snowstorm. So it's just, I don't know, just so strange to me. But the rest of this, salmonella in dog food, from what I understand, animal feed in general is filled with cut corners, probably sometimes literally. And, because the dog's not going to be able to call the USDA and complain. They're not going to be able to call the FDA and complain. So, and if we don't know that there's a problem, we're not going to address it. So that, and then of course the chicken and rice dishes and all of that. I don't know, the industrialized food production is, or should be, a lot better than it is. And we're talking about an entire system designed to grow and harvest and then, sometimes even cook, but to prepare food products for the general public at such an incredibly high level that the general public does not have to be involved in food production anymore for the first time in 200,000 years of human history. And the companies involved in doing it are so concerned about their bottom dollar and about their profits that they're going to make and they're willing to make as many people sick as they need to until the government or, another regulating body, I can't think of anyone that wouldn't be the government, steps in to make it happen. You and I are out here relying on these companies all the time to be able to provide us with food that is perfectly safe and good and healthy to eat. And on occasion, you'll end up with some foreign object. Accidents happen, mistakes occur, freak accidents, etc. But these are happening with alarming regularity. And something as simple as, the pasteurization machine broke, we've been sending out product that hasn't been pasteurized. Whoops. And how many people have already consumed it? It's these diseases are very harmful to people who are young or old. And I don't know, maybe because I associate cottage cheese as like a child's food too. It's just a particular risk for the most vulnerable members of our community. And we are so detached from industrial production in general, let alone from food production. Very few people grow their own food. And largely those who want to, are some brand of freak. And growing your own food is cool and fun, and maintaining a garden can be relaxing and very fun. And of course, it's very rewarding to eat cucumbers and tomatoes that you've grown yourself. But people left subsistence farming to move to the United States to work in coal mines and iron foundries because it was a step up from growing your own food as a living. They legitimately thought it was better to be stuck 300 feet underground in the pitch black, for 90% of the year, because sure, that beats subsistence farming. And they are willing to travel to an entirely new continent with a language and religion that they don't share with the general public in order to do it. So it's a great thing that food production is so industrialized that so few of us have to participate in it. And of course, a lot of this is being done with either slave labor or extremely abused labor, especially in the form of immigrants that are sometimes trafficked to the United States and then terribly abused and underpaid and undervalued, etc. The capitalist food production, even when it works to create good and healthy food, is not good for the people either, and has not been good for the people, let alone good for the animals either, that are involved in the industry, from meat packing to, just general consumption of animal through labor or actual eating. So, I'm not cheering on Tyson or whatever. But the industrial production of food in a society that, as we've just discussed, puts the people first is mandatory. The people should never be expected again to have to subsistence farm. It's a terrible way to live, and we just don't end up with the surplus needed to feed vast portions of the population so they can go do other things like be doctors and engineers and, I don't know, burger flippers. Because if you're flipping if you have to go harvest the wheat every morning, you're not going to have time to flip the burgers for everybody, you know. So, in conclusion, I suppose the industrial production of food should be something that we all enjoy and can be proud of, but instead it's incredibly abusive to humans, to animals, and cuts so many corners in the pursuit of capitalist profit that we all get sick from it. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. President ousts Noem as Homeland Security Secretary, March 5, 2026, via the New York Times. President Trump fired Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary on Thursday and announced plans to replace her with Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, concluding a long-building frustration with Ms. Noem that had come to a head this week with her grilling by Republicans at congressional hearings. Mr. Trump announced the change on social media, along with a new and previously non-existent role for Ms. Noem inside the administration. Special Envoy for the Shield of the Americas, which he said would be a new security initiative for the Western Hemisphere. A Senate Democrat pushes to investigate Noem for perjury. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, said on Thursday evening that he would press for a perjury investigation into Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary whom President Trump fired hours earlier. Mr. Blumenthal said that he would call for the Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations to investigate whether Ms. Noem had lied under oath during a Senate hearing on Tuesday, when she said that Corey Lewandowski, one of her top advisors, did not approve contracts for the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump said he would seek to install Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma, one of his close Republican allies, to the post instead. Mr. Trump said that Mr. Mullin was a MAGA warrior and a former undefeated professional MMA fighter who would work to keep the border secure and root out immigrants who cross the border illegally. Luckily for Kristi Noem, her failure to do a good job didn't end up with her getting put down the way that she treats her puppies. Just before we get too into it, because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this section, the article and Donald Trump is like, oh, Markwayne Mullin is an undefeated MMA champion. His record is 3-0. 3-0. That's it. He's fought 3 MMA fights, one in 2006, 2 in 2007, like November and then April and May or something like that, or February and April. 3. 2 of them were against the same opponent. And yeah, he won all 3. So, I don't know. 3-0 is technically an undefeated record. But if I did MMA, won my very first fight and quit, you wouldn't exactly call me an undefeated champion. That's just bravado for no reason. I digress. The Department of Homeland Security, of course, is in charge of immigration enforcement, and that's what Kristi Noem is known for, and known for failing to do. She's terrible at her job. She's good enough, I guess, or was good enough for what they wanted of her until she became politically inconvenient due to the fact that everybody hated her to begin with, from her shooting puppies in the back of the head to her, getting random civilians shot by ICE, and then not to mention all the other ones dying in prison. Under her watch, ICE agents are straight up taking bets over who's the next ICE detainee to commit suicide. So, she's doing an appalling job. She was doing good enough for what the administration wanted. So they decided that if they had to replace her, they had to get someone even dumber and more incompetent. So they went with Markwayne Mullin. It's the most southern first name I've heard. Dude's from the Midwest. He's from Oklahoma. On paper, he's a member of the Cherokee Nation. Now, with any luck, a Cherokee gentleman being in charge of ICE, maybe he'll start deporting whites, get them all out of here. Obviously, it's not going to happen. I mean, we've had Native American people in government and legislature before, and they didn't exactly always stand up for the people the way that we might have hoped for. We straight up had a Native American vice president who was an assimilationist and believed that we had to, save the man and kill the Indian type of thing. So, ancestry does not equal wokeness, guys. Don't get it twisted. Joe Biden was Irish and he still bombed Palestine. So if you need any more of a reminder than that, Joe Biden, the genocide heir of his own brothers and sisters. So, these guys suck and are evil and are grossly incompetent, and at least in Mark Twain, and Kristi Noem, both of them are just straight up unintelligent individuals, just not smart people. Not that college or blue-collar jobs, determine who is and isn't smart. Marquayne Mullen has an associate's degree and owned a plumbing business. He wasn't a plumber. He owned a plumbing business. Petite bourgeoisie, but other people do the work for him, and he took their money. So, I guarantee 50% of the plumbers who worked at his dad's company would be a better and more trustworthy politician than Marquayne Mullen. So, but, these guys are, just like before, getting shuffled around in order to cover up incompetence and in order to get rid of, people who make the administration, make the power look bad to the general public in order to bring in someone who might be able to be better at it, all while disposing of these people as soon as they need to be disposed of in order to protect the actual people in charge making the decisions, which would be the actual Trump administration. Kristi Noem and the other members of the cabinet are expendable. Trump is a person who is inexpendable. So they're going to get rid of anyone else. And anytime something bad happens that reflects poorly on the Trump administration, if they can cleanse it by disposing of the person that they can blame, in this case, Kristi Noem, not that I feel bad for her, not that you should feel bad for her. That's what they're going to do. So don't think that Kristi Noem or that Department of Homeland Security, which shouldn't exist in the first place, or that ICE, which shouldn't exist in the first place, or ERO or any of the other three-letter departments of the DHS, which shouldn't exist anyway, are going to be magically better just because Kristi Noem isn't there. Kristi Noem might have been uniquely incompetent. We're about to see how competent she was or wasn't. But, she was disposed of in order to keep the administration looking good. Do we feel bad for her? No. Do we just understand that that's what her job was? And this is a position that shouldn't exist in the first place. Department of Homeland Security is fake. I mean, arguably, all the cabinet positions are to some extent or another fake, I guess, as is the whole country and administration. But Department of Homeland Security was created in order to, do mass surveillance on the American public and basically create a precursor to to black shirts on American streets. The white hoods weren't doing a good enough job, so we had to create the Department of Homeland Security to do it for us. So, Kristi Noem being shuffled off is just part more of that legacy. And of course, the shield of the Americas that she's being shifted to is, probably going to end up being a nothing burger. It's nothing at the moment at all. Hopefully, in my pipiest of dreams, it's that the United States is going to pull out of NATO and create an American NATO only for the Americas. I don't know if that's going to be even better. Probably not. I don't think it'll be worse, but it definitely wouldn't be better. But hey, at least NATO would be gone. But of course, this is all just me imagining things. Like, we have no idea what the Shield of the Americas is going to be, who's going to be in it, if it's actually going to be anything, or if Trump's going to forget about it by the end of the month. Who knows? Don't get your hopes up. But Marquayne Mullen sucks. He's stupid. His undefeated record is basically fake. It's a whole lot of nothing. And him being Cherokee just again goes to prove that identity politics isn't actually leftism. Marxism isn't about identity. It's about materialism. And we can at least rest assured that Marquayne Mullen is a class traitor and can't be trusted. Hey, if you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. U.S. commanders tell troops Iran war God's divine plan. Trump anointed to ignite Armageddon, March 3, 2026, via the Cradle. Independent journalist Jonathan Larson reported on the 2nd of March that numerous U.S. service members have lodged dozens of complaints, saying senior officers are calling the war in Iran part of God's divine plan. President Trump has been anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to Earth, one combat unit commander allegedly told troops during a readiness briefing, according to a complaint submitted to the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, MRFF. The complaint is one of more than 110 logged within 48 hours, spanning over 40 units across at least 30 military installations, with soldiers telling the MRFF that commanders are describing the Iran campaign as divinely ordained and tied to the Book of Revelation. The non-commissioned officer stated that they were writing on behalf of 15 troops, and including at least 11 Christians, 1 Muslim, and 1 Jew, and described the remarks as so toxic and over the line that they shocked those present. The email sent to Larson argued that rhetoric destroys morale and unit cohesion, and is in violation of the oaths we swore to support the Constitution. MRFF President Mikey Weinstein said the over 110 reports share one damn thing in freaking common, when he called the unrestricted euphoria of the commanders, who view the war as biblically sanctioned and a sign of the approaching end times. Weinstein warned that the commanders celebrating how bloody all of this must become in order to align with fundamentalist Christian end-of-the-world eschatology may be violating constitutional and military law. He stated that any personnel advancing blood-soaked Christian nationalist wet dreams in official capacities should be prosecuted under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The reports also coincide with a pattern of senior U.S. figures framing geopolitical policy through explicitly biblical narratives. In a February interview with Tucker Carlson, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee ignited diplomatic backlash after asserting that Israel holds a biblical right to territory stretching from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq, an expanse spanning much of West Asia often called Greater Israel. Pressed on whether it would be acceptable for Israel to claim the land based on the original deed described in Genesis 15, Huckabee replied, "It would be fine if they took it all." Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has repeatedly invoked crusade language to frame what he describes as the civilizational struggle against Islam. In his 2020 book, American Crusade, he wrote that today's American crusaders would need to muster the same courage against the Islamists as those who pushed back the Muslim hordes in the 12th century. Hegseth has also drawn scrutiny for several tattoos, including the Crusader rallying cry Deus Vult, meaning God wills it, and a more recent Arabic inscription reading Kafir, and translated as infidel, inked on his bicep. This is psychotic behavior. And I don't mean that just to use, buzzwords of, oh, crazy people. This is literally psychotic to believe or to preach that the United States going to war with Iran is ordained by God as a holy war. This is not anything new either. For people who have had the fortunate happenstance to not grow up in a very conservative evangelical society within the United States, or I guess probably within, nearby Western ideas. This has been kind of one of the themes for a long time. This is the Christian nationalism is what we call it. It's the idea that the Christian faith is, or that the United States is the beacon of the Christian faith, and it's required to be, and so it has to follow Christian law. But what that Christian law is, just always happens to coincide with exactly the wishes of the ruling class, which then uses, as we started to kind of discuss earlier, that uses the Christian faith, particularly American evangelical Protestantism, but other aspects of faith, but especially the Christian faith, as a superstructure to cover up and then also to reinforce the goals of empire. I've been saying for years that, contrary to the popular historical understanding, the Roman Empire never converted to Christianity, but rather Christianity converted to the Roman Empire. And I think that's hardly been more obvious than with the United States today, in which Christianity functions as the impetus, or as an impetus for empire, at least in the public imagination. So when we're fighting the enemies of American imperialism, which would be the working classes, but especially people in the global south, and especially within the modern era, in the last 26 years, people in the Middle East or in West Asia, the religious viewpoint has taken precedence. And we can blame a lot of people for this. I think that really I'm not going to go through all of church history. I think a lot of this boils down to the Reagan era. But, even before that, with the 50s religion and the Great Revival kind of ideas, the last time that Christianity woke up in America and did something good for the people was the Civil War. Everything past that has been straight garbage. And so this belief that the United States is, the sword of God has plagued this country. I mean, George Bush literally tried to invoke the exact same, George Bush II would literally try to invoke this same kind of sentiment against Iraq. Very infamously, he called up Jacques Chirac and was like, yeah, we're fighting against the force of Gog and Magog. And Jacques Chirac, the president of France, had literally no idea what George Bush was talking about and had to call up the Association of French Protestants or whatever the Huguenots are called now, and be like, hey, explain what George Bush thinks is going on in the Middle East in terms of religion. So this is nothing new. I like to think that at least maybe back in 2003 it wasn't as dumb as overtly dumb as it is right now, but it probably was. So, and then this Christian nationalism, though, I think is so toxic in the American world, not just because of how poisonous it is to the American people and how much it's gotten the conservatives in particular on board with it, but also it's leached into liberalism, and it's leached into Christianity itself, of course. The Christianity in America is done. There is no, much like how Judaism has been permanently corrupted by, maybe not, hopefully not permanently, but has been for the time being permanently corrupted by Zionism. Christianity as a faith has been especially in the United States, has been irrevocably corrupted by nationalism, by white nationalism in particular. But again, that's nothing new. That's been on the books for a while, since back at the days of the Roman Empire. But it's crept into liberalism as well, with the holy war. Oh, well, we have to fight the Muslims. Muslims oppress women. Muslims X, Y, and Z. They abuse animals. The Prophet Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old. As if Donald Trump's not doing that every single time he can. And also, that's just straight not historically accurate. That never happened. The Prophet Muhammad never engaged in illicit activity with children, at all. Just totally fiction. And there's a lot that one can criticize Islam for, especially in its regards to women. But in broad strokes, a lot of the exact same criticisms to be leveled against Christianity. But the liberal media conglomerate, if you will, and the liberal mindset, even among the Democrats, I guess especially among the Democrats, you don't exactly see a lot of liberal Republicans, but especially among the Democrats, but even amongst some less educated members of the so-called left in America, feel that Islam is particularly abhorrent in its treatment of particularly women, because they see the hijab and they're like, oh, that's suppression. We have to destroy these evil people. And that's how we got into this mess in the first place, gearing up for war against Iran, fighting Iraq and Libya and Yemen and Palestine. A lot of the anti-Hamas rhetoric has been around the fact that, oh, they're conservative Muslims, because of course people view and interpret the world through a lens of, I don't say woke moralism, but through a lens of neoliberal moralizing instead of through actual materialist, anti-imperialist thought. Hezbollah and Hamas and Ansar Allah and the PIJ and Iran, the IRGC, these guys are all conservative Islamic organizations. And inherently there's a lot to criticize there with religious conservatism. But unlike American religious conservatism, this is being used to unify the people against empire rather than unify the people for empire. And so the struggle here is not between Christians and Muslims or Jews and Muslims. It's a struggle between the capitalist mercenary army and the people resisting the capitalist mercenary army by any means at their disposal. And one of those means to give themselves the strength and resilience to resist it is religion. And again, a lot you can criticize, a lot that should be criticized. I personally am going to rely on the people of Palestine and the people of Lebanon and the people of Yemen and the people of Iran to be able to make those criticisms and make those changes. We already know a big faction of the PFLP in Palestine is secular. There's a lot of Christians in Lebanon. A lot of them were at one point freaks, but I digress. There's a lot of Christians in Lebanon. Not that Christians are going to moderate Islam or religious conservatism, but the idea being that there are people who with other viewpoints to mediate and help mellow out. The Christians are probably not going to, especially in Lebanon. But they've got women there and who are going to help moderate this, just as they're doing in Iran, just as they've done in Palestine, etc., etc. And so all of this psychotic religious behavior coming from the West is not new, but I'm very glad to see that the United States military is at least becoming very alarmed by this, that the regular service members are not on board with this, with the religious nationalism, with the Christian nationalism, or at least not to this degree. We have to fight a holy war for Armageddon to create the return of Jesus Christ, which has been the reason to fight Iran and the reason to support Israel for generations now on the American evangelical right. And I'm glad to see that that's just straight up not sticking with a lot of people anymore, like it may have at one point. And lastly, I just want to, because I don't know how many people here grew up in that kind of society. So I don't know how many people know how normal that is, and that line of thinking has been made for so many people in America. That is like the default. When you think of an American going to church, that is the default teaching of the church. I'd say maybe, I'll be generous and say 7 times out of 10. That's the default teaching from either a mild degree to an extremist degree. So if we want to talk about religious extremists, they're American and they're white. But also, just the Pete Hegseth stuff, the Crusades. First of all, the Christians won like one crusade. All of the other ones they lost. So I don't see why, 1 out of 12 is not exactly a winning record. So I don't know why popping it up to 13 or however many crusades you want to count as individual crusades, however many you want to count, are going to be the next one that we're going to win. And the crusades also were not about religion. A religion, again, once again, was a superstructure, is a struggle between the Eastern and Western Roman empires jockeying for power over the Middle East, which is being challenged by other Eastern Muslim powers. I digress. You're not here for a history lecture, and there's lots of other places you can get an actual real history of the Crusades. But the last thing is that his tattoos are not even based on actual religious thought. His so-called infidel tattoo, based on my understanding, is often translated to a pejorative for black people in the Muslim world, and is not actually, something that one would want to be branding themselves. And I know it's been part of the U.S. military culture, because like, oh, we're fighting Islam. I want them to know that we're against them. But like, there are tons of Christians in the Middle East. That's literally where Christianity comes from. The very first Christian was a Palestinian Jew. So like, we're not exactly breaking new ground here by introducing Christians to the Middle East. In fact, it's like 60% of American Arabs are Christians. Only 18% of Muslims in America are Arab. So going to the Middle East, there's a lot of, or were at one point a lot of Christians there, especially in places like Palestine and Lebanon and Syria, and less so in some other places. But there have always been Christians there. So proudly trying to proclaim yourself as a Christian to spite them is not a thing that works. You just kind of look stupid, but what do they care? It's for them, it's all about holy wars and killing Muslims, because of course what they want to do is just kill brown people. And then the Deus Vult tattoo, Deus Vult was a term used in the Crusade times, but it really wasn't made popular, or it wasn't become like the rally cry or associated with the Crusades until video games. And I can't remember which one specifically. I'm inclined to say Crusader Kings, but maybe I'm just thinking that because it's a Crusader, because it has Crusader in the name. But it was like the Paradox games type of stuff, like Civilization isn't Paradox, is it? It doesn't matter. You guys probably know video games better than me. Correct me on which video game I'm thinking of. But it wasn't until one of those types of real-time strategy, geopolitical war games from like 2005 that made the term Deus Vult become popular. And it's, of course, become exclusively used by religious Christian radicals. And Deus Vult is very much like the other Christian radical slogan, Christ is King, in which, technically it's true of all Christians, but the only ones who say it are the freaks. Any Christian's going to say, yes, of course Christ is King, but they're not going to go out there and post under every single Instagram comment, Christ is King, because they're not freaks. And the only ones who do are the religious hyper-radicals. The only ones who say Deus Vult are the hyper-religious radicals. Those two phrases occupy in Western society the niche that Westerners believe Allahu Akbar occupies, in which it is just a saying that means God is great, that Muslims say when they see a great sunset, or every time they go to pray up to 5 times a day. Meanwhile, Christians, you'll never walk into a church and hear Deus Vult, and you'll never hear Christ is King proclaimed the way that it is, unless that church is a particular rabid radical. So I've talked about a bit too much on this already. It really grinds my gears. This is the society in which I grew up in, and I abhor it. But Christian nationalism is not rooted in reality. It's not rooted in religion or faith. It's rooted exclusively in American imperialism and the struggle, if you will, the crusade between the American Christians and West Asian Muslims is not a clash of culture. It's not a clash of society or civilizations. It is exclusively American imperialists hyping up its rabid white Christian base into a blood frenzy in order to get them to accept and cheer on and participate in mass murder in West Asia for the benefit of the Epstein cabal and other American capitalists. This week's book recommendation is Social Reform or Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg. This book is Luxemburg's argument that only through revolution can a capitalist state be transformed into a socialist one. Social democracy and bourgeois reform cannot usher in socialism. U.S. in talks with Iranian Kurdish militants over anti-regime operations. March 4, 2026, via Financial Times. Iranian Kurdish armed groups are in talks with the Trump administration about whether they could play a role in the ongoing U.S.-Israeli military campaign against the Iranian regime. This has involved conversations about whether to attack Iranian security forces in a possible ground offensive led by the groups from Iraqi territory, where they are based, people familiar with the discussions have said. The groups have asked for U.S. intelligence, weapons, and training support, as well as a no-fly zone, according to two of the people familiar, speaking on condition of anonymity, to talk freely about unconfirmed military operations. There had been no agreement on that request, the people said. One of the people said that the CIA had been leading the efforts. Two people categorized the efforts as a joint Israeli-U.S. initiative. CIA declined to comment. A former CIA official said the agency has a very good relationship with Iranian Kurds and has for many years. Donald Trump did speak to Kurdish leaders with respect to our base that we have in northern Iraq, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said on Wednesday. But she added the president had not agreed to any such plan to arm and equip Iranian Kurdish fighters. Two people familiar with Trump's outreach said he spoke to Iranian Kurdish leaders. This included a phone call with a senior figure in the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, KDPI, one of the oldest Iranian Kurdish dissident groups. Trump also spoke to Iraqi Kurdish leaders, according to two of the people familiar, including Bafel Talabani, the leader of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK, who publicly confirmed that Trump had clarified the objectives of the United States in the current war, but did not elaborate. Some analysts questioned whether reports of U.S. support for Iranian Kurdish groups had been exaggerated to apply pressure on the regime. Others expressed skepticism that Washington would be willing to provide meaningful, material support. Any attempt to arm Iranian Kurdish groups would need the support from Iraqi Kurds to let the weapons transit and use Iraqi Kurdistan as their launching ground. Sanam Vakil, Middle East director at Chatham House, questioned whether Iraqi Kurdish leaders, Baghdad, and Syria would ever allow it. It'd be a security crisis of epic proportions, and it doesn't make sense. Ahun Shiako, a member of the Kurdistan Free Life Party, or PJAK's leadership council, did not rule out the military operations if they aligned with the group's goals of liberation and freedom for our people. But he said the PJAK had not had any talks with the White House or U.S. military officials, rather only with friends of the United States. Iraqi government officials said Baghdad was deeply concerned by the support it believed the U.S. was providing to Iranian Kurds, likening it to U.S. covert support to the Afghan jihadis in the 1980s. Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdistan Regional Government, the KRG, has allowed members of the Iranian Kurdish groups, whose numbers are estimated from the hundreds to the low thousands, to operate in Iraqi Kurdistan, while also maintaining a working relationship with Tehran and its allies in Baghdad. Analysts and regional security officials say these groups have long been supported by Israel and the U.S., namely the CIA. Accusations they and the KRG deny, and have led incursions into Iran during periods of instability. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke to veteran Iraqi Kurdish leader Masoud Barzani on Wednesday. Two sides discussed strengthening cooperation in line with protecting the security of borders and preventing any exploitation by third parties to destabilize the region, a readout from Iran's foreign ministry said. Analysts point to the U.S. and Israel striking more than a dozen cities across Kurdish-majority areas of Iran this week, including Revolutionary Guards targets and border crossings, suggesting the groundwork could be laid for an operation. You really do have to feel for the Kurds, and I'm going to open that with this, because I'm not particularly a fan of the idea of ethno-states. But, the Kurdish people have been kicked around a lot by both the Turks. Right now they've been fighting a war against Turkey, or an insurgency, I don't know, however you want to define it, with the Turkish army for a couple decades. They've been fighting for recognition in Iran. If you guys remember, a few years ago, it's only 2 years ago, with the Iranian woman who was killed by law enforcement, by specifically the, I can't remember the term for them, but the guys who are enforcing the hijab laws. She was killed not because she wasn't wearing a hijab. That was their excuse to harass her. She was killed because she was Kurdish. And surprise, surprise, cops are racist everywhere. And just an aside about the hijab law, from what I understand, the current president of Iran campaigned on not enforcing that, and he won the election, and they're not enforcing it. You can go watch videos of Iran right now. Women are straight up not wearing it right in front of the cops, and the cops say nothing about it. But yeah, they're, wow, police using religious and legal doctrine in order to harass ethnic minorities. Color me surprised. I'm an American. I've never heard of such a thing. So, and then of course, Saddam Hussein very infamously used chemical weapons on the Kurdish population in the north of Iraq. And in Syria, they've been fighting a struggle for autonomous recognition as well. The most annoying Redditors are going to chatter your ear off about Rojava, whether or not they know anything about it in the first place. And so you really do have to feel for the Kurds. They've been a people without a state, without any real recognition of government, and often kicked around. And the place in which they occupy or live, I don't want to say occupy, and they're not occupying in the same way that I'm occupying this chair, not in the same way that Israel occupies Palestine. The place in which they live, being split across 4 different states, all of which, have much larger populations and much other geopolitical ambitions, have created them to be an ethnic minority that has been pushed around. It's not fair. It's not right. And this is where the idea of Kurdistan comes from. The idea that, it's a unified ethnic group, they need to have their own state. I'm against that for the same reason why I don't think every single ethnic group needs to have a state. I think that's ridiculous. We need to be creating fewer states, not more. And of course, we're not going to beat racism by building walls and force through violence, but rather by, liberating mankind from oppression. And easier said than done. I'm not going to devalue the struggle necessarily, but the Kurdish population has historically been pushed and pulled and janked around by various different powerful groups, all basically promising, hey, we're going to get your back, we're going to take care of you, we're going to relieve you of oppression if you do what we want, if you play ball with us. So from Kurdish forces in Syria being allied with the United States and then immediately kicked to the curb, to same thing happening in Iraq. One of the reasons that Saddam was so brutal against the Kurdish people was in order to stamp down a potential U.S. Intervention up there. He wasn't right. I don't want to give you the impression that that was the right or moral thing to do. And now again with Iran, we're seeing now with the United States trying to push and pull the Kurdish population into creating a problem for Iran that the United States will exploit. And spoiler alert, the United States is not going to give the Kurds a state, and they're going to kick them to the curb as soon as they're done with them. Because the Kurds are non-white Sunni Muslims. That's all there is to it. That's it. And the white evangelical American empire is only going to play with them up until it's no longer convenient to do so. And so they've been pushed and pulled around by the CIA, by the United States, by the British and French, and all for, as we saw right now in Syria, in order to help create a third front in Syria to topple Assad and install ISIS. And they used Kurdish militants to fight ISIS. So that way they would fight, kill, and die instead of American troops. And now they're looking to do the same thing again in Iran. Now, luckily, I've been seeing that a lot of Kurdish people have not been biting this very obvious bait that the United States have been dangling over them. We'll see what happens, but they seem to largely be content to sit this one out, and they should. And again, I'm talking very broadly about an ethnic group that lives across largely 4 different countries. It's not exactly a simple or a simple situation that lacks nuance. And Rojava has been attempting to create a secular progressive state, much like the PFLP, and the groups in northern Iraq have secured for themselves some level of autonomy, and they don't want to mess that up by bowing to the United States once again and causing problems in Iran that's just going to create blowback for them and serve the interests of the U.S. empire and its lapdog Israel. So, but these are very legitimate worries to have when it comes to discussions about so-called Kurdistan, the United States special project to create instability in that section of West Asia. And it's not to say that these projects are bad or wrong or ill-intentioned. Again, we don't need ethno-states. Ethno-states are a thing or should be a thing of the past. I get the pursuit of self-autonomy and all that. I don't live there. I can speak a little bit more from a. I have the ability, I guess, to look down a little on my nose a little bit towards them in their struggle. And the long and the short of it, though, is that teaming up with the United States in order to fight Iran on behalf of U.S. empire and, of course, Israel is not going to work in the best interests of the Iranian Kurdish people. Yeah, they're being oppressed by Iran. Is the United States going to be better? No. Is destroying Iran going to make a better or worse place for the Kurdish people? Well, if we need that question answered, let's take a look at Syria. Did destroying Syria make things better or worse for the Kurdish people? Or what about Iraq? Did destroying Iraq make things better or worse for the Kurdish people? And so the Kurdish diplomats who are talking with Iran and basically saying, we're probably going to sit this one out, have the better idea than the ones who may be inclined to team up with the CIA to go and cause murder and mayhem in Iran on behalf of the United States. Again, we have to look at things through an actual anti-imperialist lens rather than one of special interest, if we will, from people who have an anti-Marxist, pro-anarchist outlook on things. They might be inclined to say that, well, anything the Kurds do is going to be great. I'm speaking very broadly. Very few people think like that because most people are smart. And so, but, we have to actually look at things through a viewpoint of anti-imperialism. And stopping the spread of American imperialism is and must come first, because you cannot seek liberation while under the boot. When the Americans are stepping on Iraq, on Syria, on Iran, on Palestine, on Yemen, etc., on Lebanon, if I listed everyone, we'd be here all night. The people aren't going to be able to seek liberation. Again, this comes back to, well, they're Islamist radicals. Yeah, 2 gay dudes aren't going to be able to get married and hold hands in the street, walking down the street of Gaza. Why? Because Israel's going to blow them up, first of all. And once that threat is gone for all of Palestine, then people are going to have the freedom to start looking around thinking, maybe I actually don't care about this stuff. Maybe it's actually not a big deal if my brother likes dudes. But the pressing issue at the moment for these people and for Iran and for Iraq and for Lebanon and Syria and Palestine and Yemen, etc., is we're going to get bombed. So the struggle first for the Kurdish people has to be to throw off the American boot. And when America and especially when Israel are gone from West Asia, then they will start having the actual opportunity to secure interests for themselves. And I know that to a lot of people, this sounds like the Kurdish struggle is not important. But everything kind of has to come after, liberation has to come in steps. Can't get it all at once. You can't just say, well, we're going to have rights for women while the same women are also being crushed by capitalism. We're going to end up with, the bourgeois feminism that you see plaguing the United States today instead of true Marxist feminism, which actually liberates all the women, just as an example. And so, this is the very unfortunate and terrible situation that the Kurdish people are being backed into by the United States. And it sucks. Iran, Iraq, and Syria, and Turkey especially, because Turkey's like the big one. The Turkish government hates Kurdish people. Like, Iran has some racist dudes in it. Iraq is out of the question. Saddam Hussein is gone. Syria has literal ISIS running the place, right? So, these dudes suck. And the Kurdish struggle is real. And it's very upsetting. But whose interests do these people serve? The American Empire. I mean, Turkey is part of NATO. So, and of course, the United States installed al-Jolani, the leader of ISIS, basically. So, these struggles have to come from an anti-imperialist first, and then they can pursue their own internal struggles. And I have full faith in the ability of both the Iranian people and of all ethnicities in Iran and the Kurdish people in and outside of Iran to be able to resolve those issues to the best of their ability. And once they have the liberty to do so, with foreign occupation gone. Hey comrades, remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. In order to outperform ICE, we must first match their physical fitness standards. So if it makes sense for you, let's circle back and keep training so we can achieve 22 push-ups in 1 minute or less. While the US declared war on drug cartels, they forgot to stop arming them. March 2nd, 2026 via Covert Action magazine. On February 22, 2026, the Mexican military mounted an operation, assisted by the CIA, that killed Nemesio El Mencho Aguacera Cervantes, the 59-year-old head of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, who had a $15 million bounty on his head. A few hours later, Donald Trump tweeted, "We're winning too much, it's just not fair." The New York Times further quoted from a Mexican security analyst who claimed that the killing of El Mencho was undoubtedly the most important blow that has been dealt to drug trafficking in Mexico since drug trafficking existed in Mexico. This latter assessment is put in doubt by the fact that, going back to the days of Pablo Escobar, the strategy of killing drug kingpins has done nothing to curtail the drug demand patterns and underlying structural inequalities fueling the growth of the worldwide drug trade. Additionally, we know that many of the weapons used by drug cartels that foment violence in Mexico come from the U.S. military. 2 weeks before the killing of El Mencho, a consortium of journalists released a report detailing that about half of the high-powered 50 caliber cartridges Mexican authorities have seized from cartels since 2012 were traced to an ammunition factory outside of Kansas City, Missouri, owned by the United States government, the Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, the largest manufacturer of the rifle rounds used by the American military. The ammunition made its way to cartels via private smuggling networks that flourished as a result of systemic law enforcement corruption on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border. Investigators documented at least 87 attacks using this ammunition since 2003, 121 dead, including police massacres, helicopter shootdowns, and the government assassinations. Mexican drug cartel operatives, including the CJNG, have also infiltrated the U.S., British, and Canadian subsidized Ukraine International Legion in order to obtain know-how in the use of drone weapons that they have used to attack law enforcement officials. Meanwhile, buried inside a December 2025 federal indictment is the name Robert M. Sensi, a former CIA agent now charged with laundering $750,000 for CJNJ and offering them explosive drones, rocket-propelled grenades, and fentanyl production advice. This is not an aberration. The Obama administration's Fast and Furious operation provided 2,000 firearms into cartel hands under a poorly conceived sting operation. A generation earlier, there was the Iran-Contra scandal, by which a CIA network that included Sensi financed the arming of right-wing counter-revolutionaries in Honduras, attacking Nicaragua through illegal drugs and arms trafficking, carried out under the oversight of then-Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton. Many of the same CIA people involved in the Iran-Contra had been at the center of the CIA's creation of a clandestine army among the opium-growing Hmong in Laos to fight the communist Pathet Lao, and had set up the Nguyen Hand Bank in Australia as a drug money laundering front for the CIA. The historical pattern that emerges is clear. While U.S. leaders devote massive military resources to the war on drugs and celebrates the killing of kingpins like El Mencho, behind the scenes it is the U.S. military and the CIA, its proxy forces like the Ukrainians, that are supplying the drug cartels with weapons and technical training and supporting them in their criminal operations. The people who suffer the most are regular people, caught in the crossfire of escalating cycles of drug-related mayhem and violence. Within hours of El Mencho's confirmed death, CJNJ unleashed retaliatory violence across 12 Mexican states, causing Guadalajara, a FIFA World Cup host city, to become paralyzed. Buses burned and airports were shut. At least 25 National Guard members were killed. It was a reminder, if one were needed, that the kingpin strategy does not end cartels. It triggers succession wars and creates vacuums. And into every vacuum, the next operator, CIA badge optional, steps in to fill it. In December 2025, the Southern District of New York unsealed a federal indictment that should have been front-page news for a month. Sensi, a former CIA agent, and Paul Campo, former head of the financial operations for the DEA, were charged with laundering $750,000 through real estate deals and cryptocurrency, with a promise to launder another $11.25 million. The DOJ indictment goes further. Sensi and Campo allegedly tried to sell CJNG weapons package that reads like a Special Forces requisition order. Explosive-packed drones, AR-15 and M16 rifles, M4 carbines, grenade launchers, rocket-propelled grenades, and in a detail that should end careers and trigger congressional hearings, they offered the cartel advice on how to produce fentanyl. So there you have it. Former CIA and DEA agents offering fentanyl production advice to the cartel responsible for most of the fentanyl killing Americans. Now they want us to applaud the killing of that cartel leader when the criminal network that helps sustain him continues to operate. Robert Sensi is no rogue actor. He worked for the CIA in the 1980s as the liaison between the agency and the Bank of Commerce and Credit International, the fraudulent global bank at the center of the Iran-Contra money laundering apparatus. He visited the White House so routinely in the mid-80s, meeting with CIA Director William Casey and Vice President George H.W. Bush, that according to CIA Officer Miles Copeland, White House security waved him through without credentials. The well-exposed Iran-Contra operation was a criminal enterprise by which Reagan's CIA, directed by William Casey and coordinated by then Vice President George H.W. Bush, secretly sold weapons to Iran, violating an arms embargo, and used the profits to fund Nicaraguan Contra rebels, which Congress had explicitly banned under the 1984 Boland Amendment. To launder the Iran-Contra affair, headed by Oliver North, John Poindexter and Richard Seckard used one of the most corrupt financial institutions, known as BCCI. Sensi's specific role was to transfer funds from checks worth $1 and $4 million, made out by members of the Kuwaiti Royal Sabah family through BCCI's Monte Carlo branch, to purchase tow missiles routed to Iran, with profits flowing to the Contras. Those checks were sitting in the briefcase of journalist Danny Casolaro as evidence when he was found dead in a Martinsburg, West Virginia hotel room in August 1991, his wrist slashed. The official verdict, suicide. CIA investigator Peter Osborne's assessment, Casolaro was days from publicly exposing George H.W. Bush when he died. It could have provided testimony that would have put other Iran-Contra operators in federal prison. Attorney Daniel Sheehan, whose investigations of the CIA stretch back to the 1980s, was unambiguous in 2026. The Sensi indictment shows that the tentacles of the octopus that Danny Casolaro was working to expose are still alive and involved in the same kinds of covert activity, moving dirty money through global networks that have gone on under the CIA for decades. The Obama administration militarized the war on drugs under the $1.7 billion Plan Merida at the same time that it supplied drug cartels with weapons under Operation Fast and Furious, which was run out of the Phoenix office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF. The stated goal of Fast and Furious: let illegal straw purchasers buy weapons from U.S. gun shops, then track those weapons across the border to identify high-level cartel figures. The actual result? Nearly 2,000 firearms were walked directly into the hands of Mexican drug cartels, most of them traced to the Sinaloa organization, which the U.S. government favored over its rivals. The ATF lost track of the overwhelming majority of those weapons. At least 195 Fast and Furious guns were recovered by Mexican police at violent crime scenes south of the border. Hundreds of Mexican civilians were killed or wounded. And on December 14, 2010, the U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was shot dead in the Arizona desert. 2 of the weapons found at the scene had walked there, courtesy of the United States government. ATF whistleblower John Dodson risked everything to expose it. He had been raising alarms for months, watching weapons he knew were going to cartels disappear across the border with ATF approval. When Agent Terry was killed, he went to CBS News. His supervisor's response when Dodson had first raised concerns? If you're going to make an omelet, you're going to scramble some eggs. Attorney General Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress, the first sitting Attorney General in U.S. history to receive that designation, for refusing to hand over Fast and Furious documents. President Obama invoked executive privilege to seal thousands of pages of related records. The DOJ told Congress initially that no gun walking had occurred, and that was a lie. The DOJ Inspector General confirmed gun walking was at the heart of the operation. Fast and Furious's top suspects, Sinaloa cartel operatives coordinating and financing the gun purchases, were FBI informants simultaneously receiving money from the Bureau while using the guns to foment violence and kill other cartel rivals. As Covert Action magazine managing editor Jeremy Kuzmarov documents in his book Obama's Unending Wars, fronting the foreign policy of the permanent warfare state, the Obama administration inherited and expanded a national security apparatus that systematically prioritized covert power over democratic accountability, from drone assassination programs to surveillance to the militarized drug war. This militarized war on drugs has been ramped up further by the Trump administration, which has escalated CIA drone flights over Mexico, their first initiated under President Joe Biden, to allegedly help the Mexican government identify fentanyl labs. During the 2024 election, Trump called for the death penalty for drug dealers and, on January 20th, 2025, signed an executive order calling for a major crackdown on Mexico's cartels, which have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations, a label that sets the groundwork for potential U.S. military operations in Mexico. The operation that took down El Mencho resulted from the Trump administration's deployment of a joint military intelligence task force through Northern Command. CIA helped to identify the whereabouts of El Mencho by tracking one of his lovers and was instrumental in removing the cartel leader, according to one of the people briefed on the operation. While Trump has tried in the past to depict himself as a maverick battling the dark forces of the deep state, the war on drugs that he is expanding has been, for decades, one of the epic boondoggles of the military-industrial complex and a most wasteful government program that has provided a pretext for the CIA and other deep state agencies to expand repressive surveillance and police state measures. Salvador Santino Reglime, a professor at Leiden University, wrote the Cambridge Review of International Affairs that Trump's war on drugs is built on a logic of dehumanization and punishment, casting drug offenders, particularly those from marginalized communities, not as individuals in need of rehabilitation, but as irredeemable threats to society. This outlook has underlain the murder of more than 140 people in boat strikes targeting alleged drug traffickers in the Caribbean Sea and Pacific Ocean. Evidence indicates that many of the victims were not actually drug traffickers, and experts in the laws of war and members of Congress from both parties say the strikes are illegal extrajudicial killings. Trump's war on drugs has been marked generally by louder rhetoric than his predecessors, and even more militarized posture, more American troops and intelligence officers embedded in Mexican operations, and more designations and bounties in special task forces, while the Lake City loophole stays open, the Iron River flows south, and former CIA agents cut deals in federal court for arming the very cartels being bombed from above. And to add to the hypocrisy, Trump pardoned Honduran ex-President Juan Orlando Hernandez, despite his sentencing in U.S. federal court last year to 45 years in prison for helping move tons of cocaine to the United States. After the killing of El Mencho, it is clear that the CJNG, which evolved out of the Sinaloa-affiliated Miliano cartel, will not collapse. The DEA describes it as a franchise of approximately 90 semi-independent sub-organizations, built precisely to survive leadership decapitation. Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as El Pelon and the stepson of El Mencho, was his de facto second-in-command. But no single figure commands the loyalty El Mencho did, and the succession struggle, multiple factions, multiple ambitions, a vast network of plazas and routes up for grabs, will be settled with blood. The Sinaloa cartel is simultaneously embroiled in its own succession war between the sons of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and the faction loyal to Ismael El Mayo Zambada and his son Ismael Zambada Sicarios, who is known as El Maito Flaco. Simultaneous decapitation of both major cartel leaderships does not produce peace. It produces a scramble, more localized violence, more unpredictable actors, more mid-level commanders making dangerous decisions without senior-level restraint. On the border itself, the 17 miles of Rio Grande buoy barriers of the Department of Homeland Security in Cameron County and Operation Lone Star surges have reduced conventional crossing numbers in the Rio Grande Valley while producing the predictable balloon effect, pushing routes west into Arizona and into maritime corridors. Cartels have responded with sea smuggling, forged documentation, drone-assisted operations, and expanded use of Mexico's La Bestia freight rail network to move both migrants and contraband simultaneously. In Tapachula, Chiapas, the primary bottleneck of northward migration from Venezuela, Haiti, and Cuba, thousands remain trapped by Mexico's own interdiction operations, vulnerable to the cartel extortion networks that prey on the migrant caravans and the NGO ecosystem that has grown up around them. Journalist Gary Webb, who exposed CIA drug smuggling in Central America, documented the story in 1996. Then they maligned it and murdered him for it. Danny Casolaro told you the deeper story in 91. He died for it in a hotel room in West Virginia, with his briefcase full of documents that were never recovered. The pattern has not changed. The U.S. government designates the CJNG a foreign terrorist organization, while a former CIA officer launders their money. This is the same government that hunts El Mencho, while the army plant that supplies his ammunition stays open for commercial sales. A government that ran Operation Fast and Furious then sealed the documents with executive privilege. A government that allowed the favorite Sinaloa cartel for years to smuggle drugs into the U.S. and pardon the Iran-Contra felons promoted the men who ran the operation. This is not dysfunction. It is not a series of policy failures that keep recurring by coincidence. It is a covert infrastructure of American power, the shadow network that uses criminal relationships, drug money, and deniable operators to sustain itself, functioning exactly as it was designed to function. El Mencho is dead. Robert Sensi is in federal custody. CJNG will be fighting over his territory by summer. The Lake City plant will open for business Monday morning. The Iron River will keep flowing south. The war on drugs is 55 years old. The cartels have never been stronger. The guns have never stopped. At some point, you have to consider the possibility that this is not a failure. This is the point. Hey, it would mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Kansas sends letters to trans drivers demanding their immediate surrender of their licenses over birthright law. February 26, 2026, via The Independent. Transgender people living in Kansas have been ordered to hand back their driver's licenses if they do not reflect their assigned sex at birth, under a new law. Residents received letters informing them that the controversial House substitute for Senate Bill 244 would take effect today. The letter, as seen by Aaron in the Morning, a website dedicated to covering issues impacting transgender people, says that drivers will be issued a new license upon handing in their old one. Please note that the legislature did not include a grace period for updating credentials, the letter reads. That means that once the law is officially enacted, your current credentials will be invalid immediately, and you may be subject to additional penalties if you are operating a vehicle without a valid credential. The legislation was vetoed by Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, a Democrat, earlier this month, but was then overwritten by a Republican supermajority in the state legislature. However, the rapid enactment of the new law has left transgender residents across the state scrambling to get the correct identification. Iridescent Riffle, a transgender woman who commutes to work, said that she is now worried about getting into her car. I don't want to get a misdemeanor just for trying to go to work, she told the Kansas City Star. I'm salaried. I'm not working hourly, and not everyone has that same privilege as me. Riffle says that she has yet to receive a letter herself, despite changing her sex from M to F in 2023. Her boss has agreed to let her work remotely until she can legally drive again. SB 244 also requires transgender Kansans to use bathrooms in multi-occupancy private spaces in accordance with their sex assigned at birth, while in government buildings. The bill allows private citizens to take legal action against someone if they suspect them of not using the bathroom that is in accordance with their assigned sex at birth. If successful, someone who files a complaint against a transgender person in a public bathroom could stand to gain $1,000. And when found to have used a bathroom not in accordance with their assigned sex at birth, will be given a written warning on their first offense. On their second offense, they will receive a $1,000 fine. Third offense carries a $1,000 fine and a 6-month prison sentence. Another change enforced by the sweeping bill relates to the term gender, which has now been defined as a person's biological sex at birth. As the law continues to be rolled out today, Democratic Representative Abby Boatman has slammed the new legislation. The persecution is the point, Boatman told the Kansas City Star. Kelly Robinson, the president of the Human Rights Campaign, also accused Kansas lawmakers over choosing politics over people, forcing people into the wrong bathroom, stripping them of accurate IDs, and allowing government-sanctioned harassment doesn't make anyone safer. It targets transgender Kansans for no reason and will undoubtedly impact many others who are targeted with animus, whether or not they are transgender, Robinson said in a press release. Governor Kelly vetoed SB 244 earlier this month, describing it as poorly drafted legislation. Not only will this bill keep brothers from visiting sisters' dorms and husbands from wives' shared hospital rooms, it will cost Kansas taxpayers millions of dollars to comply with this very vague legislation, she added. The Missourification of Kansas is so disappointing. Kansas fought two struggles against bigotry. They fought two literal wars against slavery, won them both, and was kind of a beacon, as far as America goes, a beacon of actual, freedom and liberty. And this is why when the Ku Klux Klan had to be destroyed in the 1870s under the direction of President Grant, when he suspended the writ of habeas corpus in South Carolina, when he sent troops to occupy South Carolina and drag all the Klansmen kicking and screaming into prison, he took troops from Kansas to do it. So that, I've always had a soft spot for Kansas, which means that I'm perennially disappointed by Kansas just becoming more and more and more, right-wing. John Brown went to Kansas in order to defend Black Americans and destroy the institution of slavery. When Missouri invaded in order to establish slavery in Kansas. But all that aside, because again, I would pull the same for West Virginia. All that aside, and yeah, it's really disappointing to see that for Kansas. But this is just takes cake. This is just so stupid. Like, it's ridiculous to me that we're going to just invalidate everyone's driver's license because of political reasons about gender. Just from a bureaucratic standpoint, it's such a huge waste of time and resources. You're going to print everybody's new ID. Now, I don't know how many trans people there are in Kansas, but getting them all new driver's license and IDs just sounds like a huge hassle, especially if you've already gotten all your names changed and all that, and your gender markers changed on like your birth certificate or whatever, your social security. I guess I don't think it's on your social security card anyway. We've gotten that all changed, and then, what if you want to have your real ID? Just from a perspective of ID cards as I don't want to say as a product, but as a product to be acquired through the system, it's just annoying. Not to mention, again, this is just an open, clear violation of civil rights. Is it really so hard to just let things be as they are? Things already are pretty bad for a lot of people, and they're even worse for trans people in most places in the United States. Is it all that big of an ask just let things as they are and not make it worse? I guess so. And like the governor points out, that it's just a huge hassle. And the fact that they're putting bounties on trans people, well, if you go into the restroom, if you don't go into the restroom, I want you to, you can go to prison and I get $1,000 for calling it in. Really? Note to trans people in Kansas, though, it's a really good way for you and your buddies to make a quick $500. Just pull that stunt once and turn them in. Do that both times, one for each of you, and then you get an initial warning, but you each get $1,000, or you can just do it once and split it 500. I don't know. Just a thought off the top of my head. They're already screwing you over. Screw them back. Take that $500. It's probably all tax money anyway. So it's your money in the first place. Go get it. Anyway, Probably easier said than done. It's probably not going to work like that. I don't know. But it's just appalling to put bounties on people's heads for, if you can't do that for anybody else. If I see someone run a stop sign, I can't call it in and then get $1,000 from the government. That's so stupid. And, it's whatever happened to snitches get stitches, first of all. It's just grotesque all the way around. What's next? You're just privatizing privatizing is the wrong term. Subletting? I don't know. You know the term I'm thinking of. The surveillance state. Just passing it off to private citizens to do it for you for free, and with the potential that you'll pay them to do it, because you can't put cameras in bathrooms. And at the very least, I'm glad that they legislated it only so that way the bathroom thing is only for government buildings. Still really stupid. But it's like, again, as I point out all the time, there's no law saying that you have to use the bathroom of a certain sex assignment. I can go into any women's bathroom in the state and use it. Yeah, sure, in some places I might get yelled at or kicked out, but legally, that's permitted. There's nothing prohibiting me from doing that legally. Socially only. So, we have to protect, we have to keep trans people out of the bathroom. Who cares? If nobody uses a public bathroom because they're excited to use a public bathroom, you're in there because you have to go. So who's paying attention to who else is in there? The only thing you should be paying attention to is whether or not you can see feet underneath the stall when you're banging on the door. Again, so much of this is just based in social discourtesy, and to such an extreme that I'm appalled that more people don't seem to realize it. You really care all that much? And of course, it's always like, we have to protect the kids. You have to protect the kids. From what? From the extremely slim chance that a child is going to be abused by a trans individual, as if they aren't, as if people transition in order to gain access to children. Again, I probably shouldn't say that, but someone else could just use the women's bathroom to gain access if they were so inclined to gain access to a child. You think a child predator isn't deterred by the extreme moral and taboos and legal enforcement for abusing a child, but they're going to be put off by a sign on the door? Oh no, I can't abuse a child. They're in the women's bathroom. And I don't know, maybe I'm being too glib in the fact that I'm so animated about this, but it's unconscionable in all of the most frustrating ways, I suppose. And it really just goes to show that, we have to do more to look out for our neighbors. We have to do more to put down the anti-trans discussion. And we have to make sure that this isn't happening in our part of the world. And if you live in Kansas or near Kansas, do what you can to undo it. It's such an overstep in terms of the government. And again, it all leads back to, in a lot of ways, Christian nationalism, which is tied to American far-right, American imperialism in general, far-right or liberal to begin with. But it's surveillance of people's genitals. And, the fact that they're outsourcing, that's what I was looking for, outsourcing the surveillance to private citizens just means that people who don't look the way that we want them to are going to be targeted and caught up in this dragnet. People who don't look feminine in the way that they're supposed to, or that they socially are expected to, are going to be blamed for being trans and arrested. We already know the woman, if I remember correctly, she was a Buffalo Wild Wings employee, or maybe she was at Buffalo Wild Wings, and she got harassed for using the wrong restroom, even though she was a cisgender woman, and had to prove it. So, people who don't look the way they want, people who look, men who are just naturally look more feminine than expected, or than is I don't know, standard, I guess, industry standard. Women who don't conform to, or men, I guess, who don't conform through desire or through genetics, don't conform to the way that the American beauty standard is set for men and women, are just going to get caught up in this too, probably at equal or higher rates than actual transgender people. It's just another way to reinforce these white beauty standards through violence and hatred. I can almost guarantee that a good chunk of the people who are going to be picked up by this are women of color. So it's obscene, it's antisocial, it's oppressive, repressive, and violent, and it just doesn't make any sense and doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Hey comrades, another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Netflix backs out of bid for Warner Brothers Discovery, giving studios, HBO, and CNN to Ellison-owned Paramount, February 26, 2026, via TechCrunch.com. In a flurry of deal offers in the high tens of billions of dollars, the bidding war for Warner Brothers Discovery is over. David Ellison-owned Paramount will acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. On Thursday, Warner Brothers Discovery announced that Paramount Skydance's newest offer of $31 a share was a superior proposal, giving Netflix 4 business days to counter. Netflix then said it would not raise its $82.7 billion all-cash bid for the legacy studio and would walk away from the deal. The transaction we have negotiated would have created shareholder value with a clear path to regulatory approval, said Netflix co-CEOs Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters in a statement on Thursday. However, we've always been disciplined, and at the price required to match Paramount Skydance's latest offer, the deal is no longer financially attractive, so we are declining to match the Paramount Skydance bid. Per the terms of the original deal, Warner Brothers Discovery will have to pay a $2.8 billion termination fee to Netflix to end the existing agreement. Paramount's renewed offer, backed by the world's sixth richest person, Oracle's executive chair and David Ellison's father, Larry Ellison, includes paying that breakup fee. The new deal will see Paramount, which was bought just last year by Ellison Skydance Media with heavy financial backing from his father, acquiring the entirety of Warner Brothers Discovery, including its studios, HBO, its streaming service, its games and entertainment divisions, and linear television networks like CNN, TBS, TNT, Discovery, and HGTV. Ellison, whose Paramount already owns major studios, entertainment, and news businesses, has warned of significant job cuts. His ownership of news network CBS has also attracted controversy, and it's largely been seen as a sympathetic turn towards the Trump administration, with reporting critical of the administration shelved or facing increased scrutiny by Ellison and CBS's editor-in-chief, the conservative provocateur Barry Weiss. Larry Ellison is a major donor and supporter of President Trump. Netflix had announced its intent to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery in December, offering nearly $83 billion for its studios and streaming service alone. Despite several hostile takeover bids by Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery reaffirmed to shareholders its belief that Netflix's offer was superior to Paramount's, which offered $108 billion for the full company, including its linear television networks. Paramount's newest bid of $31 a share values Warner Brothers Discovery at about $111 billion. Paramount will take on about the $33 billion in debt held by Warner Brothers Discovery, according to the deal. Larry Ellison, whose net worth is $201 billion according to Bloomberg, has agreed to supply the additional equity to full Paramount's bid. Paramount's market cap is about $12 billion. The deal is also being financed at $57.5 billion debt commitment from the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Citi, and Apollo Global Management. Netflix shares jumped as much as 10% in after-hours trading in New York. Shares of Paramount were up 4.5%. Well, I feel like I've started every segment so far with, well, in any case, the Warner Brothers Discovery deal is pretty much finalized. I believe we started, I don't want to say covering this, but we first discussed this months ago, all the way back last year, probably one of our first episodes, is when it first came up. And at the time, we, like today, are going to discuss a bit about the conglomeration and monopolization of entertainment and media in American, and its effect on the American psyche. The monopolization of media and entertainment, pulling everything into just one service, is or could be, a benefit if it had end users in mind rather than shareholders. We all know many of us know how nice it was for the the little while that we had only Netflix as basically the only streaming service, and then everyone else started fracturing off, and then all the prices started going up, and then everybody had to pay more across more services to get more access to content and yada yada yada. And seeing some of that congeal again should be rather nice, but of course it's not going to. It's just going to be an opportunity to sell everything back to us at higher prices with reduced competition. Not to mention the fact that the Ellisons are acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery. So, HBO is one thing, but also CNN. We know that with their acquisition of CBS, the Ellison family, not just huge donors to the Trump administration and to the right-wing movement in general, but also very avid supporters of Israel and the genocide of the Palestinians, going so far as to pay Israeli employees double during the course of the Gaza war and or Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and censoring Palestinian or pro-Palestinian viewpoints on platforms like TikTok, and putting Barry Weiss in charge of CBS News as a radical conservative and mega racist in order to shape political opinion. So adding CNN to that mix is going to go oh so great. CNN is already the voice of capital and expresses the viewpoint of the imperialists and sells you war and murder on the daily. Now put some real freaks with some real money behind them, and we'll see what happens and how rapidly that devolves. And the fact is it's just kind of a hostile takeover, and it's all just leading to billionaire control of thought and expression. The billionaires owning and monopolizing multiple news networks helps to control a unified frame of thought being presented and taught to the American public. So that way the public thinks in the way that is being curated by the billionaires. And then the entertainment just does the same thing on a more subtle level by funding and producing art projects that tell the narrative that the imperialists want you to hear. I don't know, I can't think of any theoretical examples off the top of my head. I don't know, maybe the next Superman movie isn't going to be as softly and passively maybe pro-Palestinian as the last one was. Maybe it'll be more hardline pro-Israel, anti-terrorist kind of thing. Not that they really need to do all too much to cajole the American people to think or act a certain way. We already have tons of people, liberals and conservatives both, cheering on the war in Iran, because whether it's the dirty Muslims, or it's the evil Ayatollah is so misogynistic, we have to kill him, and whatnot. But also, we're talking about unimaginable sums of money being traded hands here. And, playing with the stock market. And just, convincing these companies to cut out workers in order to increase the profits of shareholders, people who contribute absolutely nothing to society through either work or thought. The Ellisons and Oracle and whatever, they don't do anything. They don't help anyone. They don't work, that's for sure. They own for a living. And they sell you the promise of, buy our stock, our company's going to do well, and you can get rich later on. But of course, it's just, you get rich by exploiting the workers who actually make things happen for the company and stealing all of their surplus value. and feeding them crumbs in exchange. And it's just a brutal and barbaric society in which we live in, this exploitative capitalist order. And they're talking about major job cuts. As much as we all probably like to criticize Game of Thrones, particularly for how terrible it ended, imagine how that show would have functioned with half of the staff and crew that it did, half the budget. And that's just one prominent example of one of the products they produce. And, the entertainment and content and consumption is not what we should be caring about. This is not the problem here. But it'll be putting creatives and artists and proletarian out of work in order to take those wages that they would have been paying to workers to make things happen and just keeping them as profit for the shareholders. It's not looking great. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Proton mail helped FBI unmask anonymous Stop Cop City protester. March 5th, 2026 via 404 Media. Privacy-focused email provider Proton Mail provided Swiss authorities with payment data that the FBI then used to determine who was allegedly behind an anonymous account affiliated with the Stop Cop City movement in Atlanta, according to a court record reviewed by 404 Media. The records provide insight into the sort of data that Proton Mail, which prides itself both on its end-to-end encryption and that it is only governed by Swiss privacy law, can and does provide to third parties. In this case, a Proton Mail account was affiliated with the Defend the Atlanta Forest DTAF group and Stop Cop City movement in Atlanta, which authorities were investigating for their connection to arson, vandalism, and doxing. Broadly, members were protesting the building of a large police training center next to the Entrenchment Creek Park in Atlanta, and actions also included camping in the forest and lawsuits. Charges against more than 60 people have since been dropped. Information the FBI received showed a specific person as a payment source for a particular Proton Mail account, the record shows. On January 25, 2024, subscriber information received from the Swiss Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty Unit revealed the full name as the payment source for the Proton email address Defend the Atlanta Forest at Proton Mail, it reads. 404 Media is not publishing the person's name because they don't appear to have been charged with any crime, according to searches of court databases. The document says the FBI believes that whoever manages the Proton Mail account likely has administrative access to the blog. The FBI received details about that Proton Mail account from the Swiss authorities via Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, or MLAT. An MLAT is when authorities in one country agree to provide information to another agency in another country. These are often used when the company or entity holding the information may only respond to local law enforcement demands for data. Edward Schoen, head of communications for Proton AG, the company behind Proton Mail, told 404 Media in an email, "We want to first clarify that Proton did not provide any information to the FBI. The information was obtained from the Swiss Justice Department via MLAT. Proton only provides the limited information that we have when issued with a legally binding order from Swiss authorities, which can only happen after all Swiss legal checkpoints are passed. This is an important distinction because Proton operates exclusively under Swiss law." Functionally, though, the material was provided to the FBI. Proton accepts payments via cryptocurrency, cash, and also credit card. If you use a credit card, we do have access to the payment identifier, which can then be used to identify the credit card holder from the card issuer. We check all legal orders received from Swiss authorities, and we understood that a law enforcement officer was shot and explosive devices were involved. And we verify that Swiss legal requirements were met, he added. The FBI search warrant affidavit does not mention a shooting. The document says DeKalb Police Department arrested the person believed to be behind the Proton Mail account for alleged trespass at one of the first DTAF protests in January 2022. The document also shows the authorities obtained the person's travel plans and plan to execute the search warrant at the Atlanta airport. Proton Mail previously provided authorities with the recovery email address of someone allegedly connected to the Democratic Tsunami movement, which pushes for Catalonian independence. Before people start panicking, let me just clarify the order of events to kind of clear up how the personal information from the Proton Mail got accessed by the FBI. The FBI contacted Switzerland and it's like, hey, under this shared agreement that we have about law. I want you to make Proton Mail give us this information because it's related to violent terrorism. And Switzerland jumped through all the hoops that they have to by Swiss law, whatever those are, and went to Proton Mail and was like, hey, you have to give us any information you have about this because of its use in, or because of its relationship to violent terrorism. And Proton Mail was like, hey, the only information we have at all on this has to do with the fact that it was paid, that the account was paid for with a credit card, which is the only source of payment that the company takes that has identifying information associated with it. And so they gave it over to the Swiss government as ordered by the Swiss government, who then gave it to the FBI. So, yeah, your Proton Mail is encrypted. Yeah, it's private. Theoretically, if your account is associated with anything that the United States government is going to associate with violent extremism, perhaps nihilistic, violent extremist thought in the future, they can then order it from the Swiss government, and the Swiss government will only be able to provide it if you have a credit card attached. So I don't know how you're going to pay for an account and, services and stuff with cash. I guess through the mail, maybe. They take cash. They take crypto. Don't get involved in crypto. That's stupid, gimmicky bullshit. But they take other forms of payment that isn't credit card. So I don't know, maybe go through that if you're really worried. And it does suck that something that's supposed to be secure and private isn't, and that the government will just get it, and that the Swiss government is going to play ball. Of course, we all know that the Swiss government is not exactly going to be the arbiter of morality here. They got rich off robbing the victims of the Nazis and playing ball with the Nazis, So, Switzerland is a very corrupt system as is. I digress. The other thing of note in this is that it's based on the idea that Stop Cop City is a violent terrorist organization that does arson and graffiti and shot a police officer and injured him once when a whole bunch of police officers gunned down a protester who was on his hands and knees, or on his knees with his hands above his head inside his tent, and one of them probably shot the other. The police body cam footage reveals information from the police saying to each other that they thought that they shot each other, rather than that the guy who they murdered shot him. And there's no gunpowder residue on the guy's hands. There's no evidence to prove that he actually shot the police officer, except for the testimony of the police officers themselves, which we all know cannot be trusted. So that's the violence there. And yeah, there's like firebombs or whatever being exchanged. Big deal, who cares? Don't forget that Stop Cop City is a very important movement. These cop cities are being used in order to train police and law enforcement, including ICE, on close quarters combat and close quarters battling to fight you in your city if you ever speak up against the United States Empire. And they're using it to train people to go and fight and kill Iranians and Palestinians and Syrians and Lebanese and Yemenis and Iraqis and probably one day Jordanians too, and anyone else that they want to get their hands on. They've already done it to Iraq. They've already done it to Libya. They've already done it to Lebanon and Palestine and Syria and Yemen, and are trying now in Iran. They've done it to countless other places. They will do it to you. And your white skin's only going to protect you for so long. That's what these cop cities are about. They're about enforcing the monopoly of violence from the state against the public and training their violent enforcers to maintain control of an increasingly disillusioned and disassociated American populace. So Stop Cop City is good. It's great. More people should be involved in that. Look up the ones near you, if there are any. Hopefully not, but if you're in the Atlanta area, if you're in the Hershey, Pennsylvania area, if you're in, I think there's like 23 others across the country, that's what they're building these for. They are training grounds to teach close quarters battling to law enforcement so they can hunt and fight you. And they can hunt and fight anybody that they deem to be a threat, which is people who espouse ideas that associate them with the nihilistic violent extremists, which, remember, includes things such as contrary opinions on religion that contradict like traditional American beliefs, something like that. Basically, if you're not Christian, if you're not white, if you're not conservative, go look it up. It's pretty horrifying. We did a couple episodes on it previously. But if, just not being exactly who they want you to be marks you as a potential terrorist. And again, the violent, nihilistic extremists in the United States. So that's what these cop cities are about. And so people who are associated with them are being hunted by the police, quite literally in some cases, and being murdered. Other times, they're contacting the Swiss government to force private companies in order to give over any identifying information that they could possibly have access to in order to root you out. Good thing is, the person who may or may not have been identified did not have any charges brought against them by the government. So at the moment, this seems kind of just more of a fear and a scare thing in order to intimidate the public, you and I, and to keep us from getting organized, and so we back off of services that are going to be secure and protect our information to a pretty decent extent. Or they went fishing and couldn't catch anything. Who knows? But having Proton mail is encrypted. It is only beholden to Swiss law. Unfortunately, the Swiss government will play ball with the FBI, so a couple steps removed, a little difference in the end, but that's the story. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization, and that means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Every week, there's more news than we can reasonably cover. Here are a few stories you should know about. Links to learn more are in the video description. The DOJ has been taking down Epstein files. Here's what remains. March 3rd, 2026 via CBS News. After removing tens of thousands of files, the Department of Justice currently makes public about 2.7 million pages of documents related to Jeffrey Epstein. And now, in part in response to widespread criticism and concern from survivors and their attorneys that the files contain nearly 100 survivors' personal information and photos, the DOJ has scrambled to remove documents. As CBS News analysts found that as of late February, the Justice Department has taken down more than 47,000 files comprising about 65,500 pages. Links to those files now return a page not found error on the department's website. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche said the department reviewed 6 million total pages, meaning what it initially released constitutes less than half of the total. He said the DOJ withheld files to protect survivors and ongoing investigations, but lawmakers, who have access to the unredacted trove, have criticized the redactions, arguing that some protect powerful men instead of survivors. Trump names Erika Kirk to Key Advisory Board of U.S. Air Force Academy, March 10, 2026, via The Guardian. Donald Trump has appointed Erika Kirk, the widow of murdered right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, to a Key Advisory Board of the U.S. Air Force Academy. The 37-year-old joins a number of other loyalists to the president on the 16-member panel of the Academy's Board of Visitors, which, according to the Air Force Academy website, inquires into the morale, discipline, curriculum, instruction, physical equipment, physical affairs, academic methods, and other matters of the Colorado Springs military training facility. Google hit with shocking wrongful death lawsuit over Gemini AI chatbot, March 4th, 2026, via Mashable. Google and its parent company Alphabet have been sued by the family of a man who says he killed himself at the urging of the search giant AI chatbot Gemini. The wrongful death lawsuit was filed in a California federal court Wednesday on behalf of the family of 36-year-old Jonathan Gavalas. Gavalas started using Gemini in August 2025, according to the suit. In October, it claims Gemini convinced Gavalis to kill himself after Gavalis failed to accomplish real-life missions assigned by the chatbot, part of a fictional attempt to secure a robot body for Gemini. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.